Well, we are continuing our adventure with the Apostle Paul and Silas and their traveling buddies in the book of Acts. So if you want to find your place there, we're in Acts chapter 17 tonight. You may want to, if you have handy your map, that I made this available at least a couple of weeks. I hope that you still have yours. You might find it helpful tonight as we trek with Paul across Macedonia. So we left Paul at the end of chapter 16. He was being run out of Philippi on a rail, so to speak. But he was, good things had happened in Philippi. A couple of the more noteworthy things that happened in Philippi was Lydia got saved and baptized in Philippi. And most scholars would say or believe that she was the first European convert to the gospel. So that's certainly significant. Also, she housed a church in her house. So Lydia was a very important person in the gospel mission in Philippi. Also, Paul and Silas were arrested and thrown in jail in Philippi. That was getting to be a common occurrence, it seemed, that every town they got to, they either were arrested or run out of town. But while they were there, God sent an earthquake, and the prison doors were open, but the prisoners didn't escape. It wasn't a deliverance of the prisoners, it was a deliverance of the jailer, who ends up getting saved. And he asked Paul and Silas, "What must I do to be saved?" And he gets saved and baptized, and his whole household gets saved and baptized. And so some good things happen in Philippi. And then they basically leave Philippi and are headed down the Ignatian way, the Roman road that ran through Philippi, and they're going to make their brief journey from there to Thessalonica, which by way of a couple of other towns, Amphipolis and Apollonia, that we aren't really told a whole lot about what might have happened in those towns. But then they make their way to Thessalonica, which is the next little town, not little town, but the next town that where some significant events are recorded in Acts. So let's pick up right there. I'm in verse 1 of chapter 17 of Acts. Now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures. Remember, we identified that as kind of Paul's M.O. When he got to a town, he always started it with the synagogue, preaching to the Jews, and then when they rejected, then he turned to the Gentiles. Verse 3, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded, and a great multitude of devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women joined Paul and Silas. But the Jews who were not persuaded, becoming envious, took some of the evil men from the marketplace, and gathering a mob, set all the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some brethren to the rulers of the city, crying out, "These who have turned the world upside down have come here too. Jason has harbored them, and these are all acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying there's another king, Jesus." And they troubled the crowd and the rulers of the city when they heard these things. So when they had taken security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. Okay, so Paul is now making his way to Thessalonica. He goes to the synagogue and he preaches basically his gospel message, and based on what verses 2 and 3 say, what's the crux of his gospel message? Yeah, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. So he starts out kind of by saying this: the Messiah must suffer for the sins of the world. So remember, he's talking to Jews. So when he starts talking about the Messiah, he's communicating on their level. The Messiah must suffer for the sins of the world. Second, the resurrection of the Messiah is the validation that he is the Christ, that he is the accepted one, and Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the Messiah. So basically, the Messiah had to suffer for the sins of the world. The Messiah would not only suffer, but also rise from the dead as God's validation that he is the true Messiah. And since Jesus died and rose again, then that is God's validation that he is the Christ in the way of salvation. Now, why was it necessary for Christ to suffer and rise again? And Paul would say Christ had to suffer for the sins of the world, and by rising again, that provided what? So that's assurance for us, and it's also validation for that he is the Christ. Now, we're given this neat little tidbit of insight in verse 6 about how the gospel mission was going up to this point. And what would you say was so far, was it successful or not, based on verse 6? Yeah, they've look at verse 6. When they say, these who have turned not just the city, these who turned the world upside down have come here too. So at least in the eyes of the Thessalonian mob that's making these accusations, Paul's preaching of the gospel mission has turned the world upside down. So it was having quite an impact, apparently, already in the very early stages of the gospel mission. It was already having a profound effect on the world, on the known world. Now, it says that he stayed and preached 3 Sabbaths. He reasoned with them from the Scriptures. This would be 3 weeks. Do you think he stayed just 3 weeks, or do you think he stayed longer than 3 weeks? What do we have some evidence that would support that? Well, you figure we did, or I wouldn't ask the question, right? So, well, the Greeks probably wouldn't have been in the synagogue. No, they would have been Gentiles. But so there's a couple of things. Not one from Acts and then one from Philippians. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 15 and 16, Paul is writing to the Philippians, but he references Thessalonica. He says, "You Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only, for even in Thessalonica you sent aid once and again for my necessities." Now, here's the idea. If the church at Philippi is taking up a love offering, and on not just one occasion, but on multiple occasions they're sending these love offerings to Paul at Thessalonica, you would assume that he was there for longer than 3 weeks. Also, apparently, in that a church had been established in Jason's house, because the mob comes, and where do they come? They come and attack Jason's house to bring out the Paul and Silas to the people. Well, why would they attack Jason's house? Well, you can assume that because that's where the church was meeting, and if the church was already meeting in a house, he would assume that Paul and Silas had been there long enough to establish an ongoing ministry there. So we assume that he was there for a longer period of time than just 3 weeks. We have not talked about Jason before. Well, he just kind of appears here. We don't know a lot about Jason. We know that Jason was a resident of Thessalonica who apparently got saved and housed a church in his house, and then apparently suffered some persecution because of that, because they come to his house looking for Paul and Silas, and the mob does. They can't find them, so they drag Jason. I'm in verse 8. Drag Jason and the brethren to the ruler's city. So he's suffering a little bit of persecution there. I say a little bit of persecution. If it were me, I'd be thinking it was a whole lot of persecution if they come and drag me out of my house to the rulers and all of that. But we're not told a whole lot about Jason. Yes, ma'am. So they take security money. I think that's one of my questions here. What was this? What was the security money supposed to do? By them taking security money from Jason, what were they trying to prevent? Huh? Well, they're trying. What do they want to stop? They want to stop the church, and specifically, they want to stop Paul and Silas from preaching the gospel. So the idea is, okay, Jason, we're going to take money from you. We'll leave you alone, with the understanding that preaching this gospel has got to stop. Now, did it stop? No. Jason's like, well, I'll give you some money and leave us alone, but the stopping of the gospel isn't going to. But that was the idea there. So the second missionary journey is the first time he goes to Thessalonica, and then the third, it'd be the second and the third. And off the top of my head, I don't have that information, but I don't think it's a terribly long time. He makes it back to Antioch, which is home base, and then it's not long that he ends up on the third journey. Yeah. So let me get to his third and fourth journey. Okay, so he does trek through Thessalonica again on the third journey. And it's possible that they sent it once on the second journey and once on the third journey, or multiple times. Paul seems to indicate in Philippians that they sent it multiple times. So, but that's the idea. So what were the charges that were brought against the Christians by the Thessalonian Jews? Treason is one. Yeah, it says they're teaching us to act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, and teaching that there's another King Jesus. So that's treason. What else they accuse him of? Do what? Stealing? Well, not so much stealing. They accuse him of harboring criminals. They they say they're harboring, basic. And who were the criminals that they were harboring? Paul. Yeah, I mean that's the idea. And they accuse him of inciting a riot. Um, they've turned the world upside down, and they've come here to do it too. Is the idea there? Questions on that? News, yeah. See, they're sitting right on that main Roman highway, the Ignatian Way. That was the Route 66 of Rome. So I'm sure news was traveling fast through that region. That hey, there's these people, Paul, Apostle Paul or Paul, and he's they're preaching this new religion, and it's turning the world upside down. So news of them had preceded them there. Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, this little group of Jews are just following them around to cause trouble. I mean, it would be funny, and we read it today, and it's kind of funny. But I'm sure to Paul, it wasn't very funny. It wouldn't have been funny to me if this one little group were just following me around, just trying to stop what God was doing. I got a couple of pictures of Thessalonica here. This is so this is some of the only ruins that are left in Thessalonica. The, 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 the new city of Thessaloniki was built over the old ruins of the old city, so there's not a lot of them available to archaeologists. But this particular one, you see a little bit of the marketplace here, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's actually like a theater over there, kind of in the corner there. So this is right in the middle of downtown Thessaloniki. I mean, it's like cars whizzing by, like I'm trying to keep from getting run over while I'm trying to take this picture here. But uh, what of the of the theater? Yeah, right. All right. So Thessaloniki is the way the Greeks pronounce it now, and our friend Dave Stott, I think, says a little bit about that in the video. But um, in Roman times, it would have been known as Thessalonica, um, but modern day Thessaloniki, but it's the same town. Thessaloniki today, Thessalonica. Um, you know, you say we say Thessalonica, they say Thessaloniki. We say tomato, they say tomato. It's that kind of thing. So let's see the next picture. Oh yeah, this is the view from our hotel room, and that is actually Mount Olympus that you can see in the distance there. Now, imagine if you're going to Thessalonica, and you're going to preach that there is one God, and the people of Thessalonica every day can look at a view of Mount Olympus, where the gods are supposed to live. You see the paganism and the idolatry that you've got to try to counteract, just to get them to think in terms of there is one God. All right, and then do I have one more? Is that it for? Okay, that's all for Thessalonica. Um, so they're going from there to Berea because they're being basically run out of Thessalonica, which is kind of becoming a common thing, that Paul goes to a town, he preaches a while, and they run him out of there. Questions on Thessalonica? All right, let's look on to verse 10 then. Then the brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the Scriptures daily to find out whether these things were so. Therefore, many of them believed, and also not a few of the Greeks, prominent women as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that, okay, now here's what we're talking about. This is exactly what we're talking about. Verse 13. When the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was preached by Paul at Berea, they came there also and stirred up the crowds. It's not enough that they run them out of their town. They're going to go to the neighboring town and try to run them out of there too. Then immediately the brethren sent Paul away to go to the sea, but both Silas and Timothy remained there. So those who conducted Paul brought him to Athens and received a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him. With all speed they departed. Okay, so they leave, and you can see, if you got your little map, you can see we're up here in the corner of Macedonia. They land at Neapolis. Last week they were at Philippi. Tonight they pass through Amphipolis and Apollonia, and they go to Thessalonica, and now they're at Berea, right here. And you even see Mount Olympus is actually marked on the map there. Now they're going to leave Berea and they're going to head to Athens, but we won't get to Athens until next week. But we're going to talk a little bit about Berea tonight. So Luke describes the Bereans as being more fair-minded, literally more noble is the word, than the Thessalonians. And now, in what way do they provide a noble example for us as believers today? They searched the Scriptures daily. They were open-minded, apparently, but yet they tested everything by the Scripture daily. And so that's the idea. So what do you think, what do you see that's significant about the prominent men and women of both Thessalonica and Berea turning to Christ? Not just the ne'er-do-wells or the ones who no one paid attention to, but the people of prominence, the significant people were turning to Christ. So what does this do for the gospel mission and the gospel message? Yeah, exactly. You know, it funds it, but so when let me see how I want to do this. When I am flipping through channels and I see, on the travel channel, some guy in a straw hat and overalls and no front teeth standing out by a cornfield, and he said, I was abducted by aliens, and they took me and my wife up into the ship with them and spit me back out in my cornfield, and I know all about it because I graduated second grade in 1952. How much credence do you give to that story? Are you going to go look outside to see if they're aliens? I mean, I'm probably not. But if, I got to be careful how I ask this question, if the Secretary of Defense comes on the news and says, we have shot down 4 UFO, 4 unidentified objects. They come on and they said, NORAD has shot down 4 unidentified objects flying over Canada. We don't believe there's any threat to civilians, but in an abundance of caution, fighter jets have shot down 4 unidentified objects. Do you lend more credence to that? Well, yeah. I believe they shot down something. I don't believe it was aliens, but I believe they shot down, something. I don't know. Somebody's balloon that they were flying over Alaska or something. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think that there's something there. So I say all that to say that by prominent people accepting the gospel, now you have credence. These people were well respected. It's like when Constantine became a Christian. Suddenly, it went from being a criminal act to being a Christian to being the thing that was in vogue. If the emperor is a Christian, then guess what? I want to be a Christian too. Now, we can debate as to whether that necessarily helped or hurt the church. I think you can make arguments for both sides of that. But fact is that it became an acceptable thing if the emperor is a Christian, then it's the thing to be. Prominent people are getting saved. It lends credence to it. Questions on Berea? I got a couple pictures of Berea here. Oh yeah. In honor of Valentine's Day, here's a couple of lovebirds in Berea. So this is actually at a. There's not a lot to see in Berea, but this was actually a little monument memorial area to the Apostle Paul, commemorating when he came to Berea. So that's where that was. Yeah, that's where that was. All right, next one. Oh yeah, this is a video. If we can get the video to play, push play and hope for the best. So I got to say, this is a fountain in Berea. It's just very near where that thing is, very near where that memorial is. So we're going along, and I see this fountain, and it looks ancient, and I'm thinking, okay. So I asked our tour guide, I'm like, when does this fountain date back to? Because I'm thinking, okay, did the Apostle Paul stop and get a drink from this fountain, And she goes, oh, I think it was about 20 or 30 years ago. The city was doing some improvements, and they put this fountain in. So I don't know. So it's not from the time of Paul, but it looks cool, and it looks ancient, and I thought I would just throw that in there. Do I have another picture on this one, or is that it? Oh, yeah. So this is the synagogue in Berea. It says Paul went to the synagogue in Berea. Now, obviously, you can tell from the condition of this and the architecture, this does not date from the time of the Apostle Paul. The interesting thing is, they believe that this synagogue was built on the ruins of an ancient synagogue, quite possibly the synagogue that Paul would have gone in and preached. And that's in Berea. So that's kind of interesting, I thought. Any questions on Berea or anything we've talked about tonight? You don't even remember going there, do you? Yeah. Yeah. You slept through that part of the tour, obviously. Yeah, that's right. Well, that fountain, right at that fountain, one lady did like nearly pass out, and but she lived through. We didn't. Yeah, you can tell. Yeah. That was in Berea. Yeah. All right. I have about a 7-minute video.